One of the important variables that made up an ecosystem was the relationship of natural predators. If there weren't any natural predators, unlimited reproduction would destroy the ecosystem and in the end destroy itself. The bugs in front of him were like that. If they ate up all the roots, the bugs would most certainly die. However, the fire tar wanted him to just remove the bugs. The art of death skill can't be a solution all the time. He could make the bugs into an undead. At most he could create 100 of them a day. But most importantly, he couldn't make them multiply like he did with the zombies. Undead is a curse normally cast on humans and other humanoid races. Bugs weren't a humanoid race. Of course, they weren't included. I need natural predators. It seemed necessary for him to make natural predators protect the plum tree. A natural predator of a bug everyone knew was a bird. However, it wouldn't be able to consume a fist-sized bug unless it was quite a large bird. It was hard to get flocks of huge birds immediately. Overpopulated aphids. Myung picked up a bug and looked at it carefully. As he pressed on the bug's bulging belly, he was able to feel that it was full of water. They had already sucked out the plum tree's sap. Bugs like aphids tended to extend their lives like this. The natural predator of aphids are beetles. He had learned about bugs when he was training to become an assassin. He became proficient at the skills of assassination by using everything including poison, animals, bugs and etc. There were some bugs that were useful depending on the situation. For example, there were bugs of solitude that died when their partner died, some that reacted to a specific sound and some that followed a specific scent. It was a world of infinite possibilities. The Plutonian beetle. Soon after, Myung remembered its name. The Plutonian beetle was a beetle-type monster that lived in the underworld and grew up to 1 meter. It dug up the ground and used its long mouth to eat the aphid-like bugs living underneath the ground. Normally, they were scattered all over the underworld, and although he wasn't sure if these monsters would eat these bugs, he felt it was worth a try. Myung took out a talisman. Soon, a flock of 100 harpies flew around Myung. Search as far as you can and find bugs that look like these. Bring them back alive. Myung drew a picture on the ground. He described its characteristics and ordered the harpies to paralyze the bugs and to bring them to him alive. Harpies possessed a paralyzing poison in their wings. It should definitely be possible for the harpies to fulfill this task as the Plutonian beetle were very strong. After a day, 30 harpies returned. Myung knitted his brows after looking at the different types of bugs the harpies brought him. Maybe it was because they were undead, or perhaps it was because they were bird-brain but there were no Plutonian beetles. As time passed, more than 20 appeared, but the situation was the same. Did the others that didn't return die? Myung was able to see the last few moments when a ghoul or a zombie died. However, he was unable to confirm if the others died, possibly because harpies had small brain capacities. More than half came back alive. But it was still a relief that this much had come back alive as they recklessly ventured all over the demon god's territory. He expected only about half to survive, but 70% did. But there is still a chance. Myung still held on to this slight chance. Among these, there could be a bug that might react to the giant aphids. He dug a hole and made a tunnel and placed the aphid and the bugs that the harpies brought together. However, it didn't result in any great effect as he hoped. The bugs can't use their strength. It was strange. Did something go wrong when the harpies brought in the bugs? Besides the aphids, all the rest of the bugs didn't move properly. Their movements seemed stiff as if they were shivering in fear. Every day, Myung continuously let the harpies out to investigate the cause. And using all the undead, he was restricting the territory of the bugs. It was to protect its roots even a little longer. And after 7 days, Myung was finally able to get the one he wanted. The Plutonian beetle. Finally, he was able to obtain a Plutonian beetle. Only 10 harpies were left. It was by sheer luck. On top of that, the Plutonian beetle was bearing eggs. Only about 1% of the 1,000 eggs it bore became larvae, but if Myung could arrange an environment, he could increase it to 10%. However, like the other bugs, the Plutonian beetle's body was stiff. It was scared. What do you think is the problem? I don't know. Myung questioned the blazing spear soldier as he sat on a rock. Although the blazing spear soldier had the knowledge of Fire Dragon Wu, It seemed like this problem exceeded his ability. It seemed like it would become a problem if he didn't find the reason why the bugs were scared, even if he did find a natural predator. If he used the Eye of the Sky skill, he would be able to use the knowledge in the Sky Library, but what would he search for if he didn't even know the cause? I have analyzed situations more complex than this. Although it was when he was brainwashed, Mu-young was able to succeed in everything from analyzing and infiltrating to assassinating. It wasn't like he couldn't do it anymore. Mu-young climbed up the tree. The fire tars would have scolded him if they found out. However, he needed to be daring. Nothing would change if he just stood there. Then Mu-young closed his eyes as he assimilated with his surrounding, his body swaying with the wind. The sky was quiet. Even the ground was quiet. This place was especially quiet. Mu-young shut off his emotions. Even his spirit was shut off. He attempted to become a weak living organism. It was his last resort to find out why the bugs were afraid of this place. However, it wasn't enough. His primal human nature refused. Although Mu-young had become the wind and the ground as he concealed himself, he never had become a weak living thing like a small animal or a bug. This is also a challenge for me. He challenged unknown fields that he never attempted before. He tried to become weak. To shut off his instincts. It wasn't easy. That was why this was a challenge. Soon Mu-young's senses widened and even quite a distance away came into his sight. Bugs that didn't approach him started to climb on top of his body. Mu-young just stood there like a scarecrow. As time passed, Mu-young fell into a deeper state of mind. Purr. Mu-young's body shivered in fear. No bird could approach him. The bugs weren't able to move. He seemed to understand why only the giant aphids were fine. The pum tree suppresses fire attributes. That was right. The giant aphids sucked out all the sap of the tree and neutralized the attributes of fire. That was how they were able to grow so big. The bugs who were instinctively afraid of fire couldn't move. Then where was the fire? Mu-young's eyes turned towards the faraway location where a huge village was situated. The problem is the village of Fire Tar. The Fire Tars respected the pum tree. It was natural for them to gather around here. That was the biggest problem. The fire attributes of the Fire Tar were too strong. It didn't subside. Other weak monsters and bugs would follow their instincts and wouldn't approach this location as they feared it. Only the giant aphids were able to be active as the tree neutralized the fire attribute. Mu-young climbed down from the tree. He quickly walked towards the Fire Tar's village. You really want to get killed, don't you, goblin? Late in the evening. The gatekeeper of the Fire Tar's village greeted Mu-young at the entrance. It wasn't that welcoming, but Mu-young didn't even budge. Call out the vice chieftain. I have an appointment with him. There is no reason for our vice chieftain to make an appointment with a goblin. Go away or I will show you why the Fire Tars are known as the most ferocious, ill-tempered race. He tried to scare him. However, Mu-young was far off from getting scared from that sort of threat. I have solved the secret to why the bugs are eating the roots of the pum tree. If you don't call out the vice chieftain, I will just leave. What? Mu-young didn't explain twice. He just looked up the giant covered in flames. The gatekeeper could only ponder if this information was true or not. If the goblin was lying, the goblin would die horrifically, but he would also get reprimanded for believing in a goblin. On the other hand, it would become a bigger situation if the goblin was telling the truth. The thing the whole clan wanted the most. For that to become a waste because of him? It wouldn't be able to repay it all with even his life. The gatekeeper decided that it was better to be reprimanded alone than risk the whole village and nodded. If you are lying, I will make you taste all the sufferings offered in this world. I will go to your clan leader and burn him and make sure he never breathes another breath. Call him. A short answer. Mu-young was calm even when the Fire Tar was spitting fire. Instead, the flames the Hell Horse breathed out were scarier. Fire Tar was a monster few ranks below the Hell Horse. The gatekeeper left huffing and puffing. After 10 minutes, he brought the vice chieftain. The vice chieftain tilted his head to the side as if he never expected Mu-young to show up. You really found a way to exterminate the bugs? He had said it to play a trick on him. Never in his dreams did he expect Mu-young to find a solution. Mu-young spoke clearly. There are two ways. There are even two? The vice chieftain glared at him as if he couldn't believe what Muyang was saying. Although the fire tars weren't the smartest bunch, they were unable to come up with an answer even after they put their heads together. They tried lots of different ways, but it was still the same. It didn't make sense that Muyang solved this in 10 days. What was more, he found 2 methods. If it was true, it seemed like the pride of the fire tars were going to collapse. First way is to move the plum tree. In a rocky place, bugs can't lay their eggs. It won't be able to bring in enough nutrients and it will dry up quickly, but it will still live 5 more years. That can't ever happen. As he expected, the fire tars believed the tree was sacred. But to pull its roots and to move it? It would be a blasphemy. The vice chieftain's eyes were filled with disbelief as if he couldn't believe the goblin had said this as a solution. What's the second method? If the second method is also worthless, I will save your life as I was the one who requested this, but you will face some harsh punishments. The vice chieftain fire tar threatened him. Muyang chuckled out loud. It seemed like their personalities were all similar. They were all ferocious and ill-tempered. Even their threatening routines were the same. Of course, Muyang also didn't think they would choose the first method. Muyang shrugged his shoulders and spoke. Leave this village. Leave this village? The vice chieftain's body trembled. He believed that Muyang was mocking him. Before he exploded, Muyang continued to talk. All fire tars must distance themselves from the plum tree. You also need to reduce the number of times you visit the plum tree. Just in case he didn't understand, Muyang explained. You guys are a hindrance to the plum tree. I can't listen to this any longer. The fire tar vice chieftain burst into flames. His large body shook as the surroundings burned. All fire tars respected the plum tree. For them, the plum tree was an existence they could never live without. The fire tars could only live by neutralizing their fire with the branches of the plum tree. However, Muyang said that it was the opposite for the plum tree. Of course they were mad. It has already been more than 50 years since we lived here. If we move after listening to a goblin, we'll become the laughing stock of all fire tars. Thump. Vice chieftain stepped forward. As if he was going to kill Muyang if he said another word. Fire tars were warriors who had a very high sense of pride. If they were ever looked down upon, they would have to leave their territory. Clap. Muyang clapped his hands once. Then the blazing spear soldier brought tens of different types of bugs in a box. If you can't believe me, I will prove it to you. Muyang spoke as if he was doing them a favor. Would anyone refuse when someone said they were going to provide them with proof? Vice chieftain calmed his flames for a moment and spoke. If this is your last excuse, then let's see. Even if he was mad, he never acted out. He tried hard his best to listen to what Muyang had to say. The title of vice chieftain wasn't just for show. This should be worth doing. At least he was willing to listen. That meant that he was more open-minded compared to the other fire tars, and that it would be likely that he would be willing to acknowledge Muyang if he understood his explanation. If vice chieftain was stubborn, the process of making him understand would have been filled with obstacles. First, I need to explain to you the relationship of natural predators. Relationship of natural predators? As fire tars had no natural predators, it might have been hard for them to fully understand this. It seemed like Muyang's thoughts were right. He continued. It's the relationship where one eats another. You guys might not have experienced this before, but it is present in all mammals, bugs, and living things that make up the ecosystem. Because of the fire attribute you let out, weak creatures aren't able to get close. Us fire tars don't hunt the weak. Muyang shrugged his shoulders. Technically, the natural predators of the fire tars are those large weak aphids. Those huge aphids are the only ones that can move around in the presence of the fire tar's fire attribute. You can see that, unlike those aphids, these bugs can't even move. Just a mere bug. These mere bugs were killing the plum tree. And you guys weren't able to dispose of these bugs. Vice chieftain closed his mouth. It was extremely insulting, but he was still interested in why. If it really was nothing, he could later kill him painfully. Muyang continued to talk. The huge aphids suck the sap of the tree. The roots especially seem effective in neutralizing the fire attributes. The aphids that suck on the sap weren't affected by the fire attribute. On the other hand, Young touched the bugs that didn't move as if they were frozen. The other bugs are stricken with fear and can't move. Normally, these would eat the huge aphids and keep a balance in the ecosystem. These small bugs. As if the vice chieftain couldn't believe what Young had to say, he bent over to take a look at the bugs. Young said these could eat up the aphids that they couldn't get rid of. However, it was only natural that the vice chieftain didn't know anything about this. There were no fire tars who had any interest in the ecosystem. They believed that strength was the best and didn't bother to exchange any knowledge with others. If they had deepened relationships with other races, things might have been a bit different, but fire tars were predators who had no natural predators themselves. Who would dare try to deepen their relationship with them? Of course, even if they were to visit them, it would be rare to find someone who would analyze the situation like Young. Afterwards, Young took his time to help them understand as he slowly unveiled the secret. On the other hand, the vice chieftain didn't seem enthusiastic. He thought that there was a chance that Young might be sweet-talking him with believable words to trick him. However, he had definite evidence. If you won't believe me, I will show you. As if it wasn't hard, Young took out a small bottle from his sides. It is the sap I have gathered from the pum tree. If I pour this in the wooden box. Fush. Young poured the entire bottle full of sap into the wooden box filled with the bugs. Then the scared bugs that were unable to move started moving. Afterwards, to fill up their starving bellies, they attacked the huge aphids. Now that they aren't as heavily affected by the fire attributes, they see the aphids as food and start to move. The problem is, once the sap dries, the effect disappears. That's why you fire tars need to move your village. You mean our existence harmed the pum tree? That is so. Young was completely cool-headed. As if he was stabbing a knife into their hearts, he continued to talk. You fire tars move to another territory every few decades. I assume it's because of the pum tree. Am I right? The fire tars didn't live in this area 5 years later when Headley's cow was found. If monsters like fire tars were spotted, the information would have already been spread. Young believed they moved their territory once the pum tree dried up. As he expected, the vice chieftain nodded. You are right. Same problem continuously occurs when we move to another region near a pum tree. We concentrate on killing the aphids, but we never thought about using the natural predators to naturally restore them. That is also true. You will be able to see fast results when you move your village. Afterwards, you need to make sure that no other fire tars stay near the tree. The Plutonian beetle which was bearing eggs was waiting in a safe place. He was planning to release it once the fire tars moved away. However, he didn't hear an answer he wanted. Both are impossible. Even if your answers were correct, no fire tar is going to listen to a normal goblin. I proposed a method to solve your problem as promised. To act upon it or not is entirely up to you guys. Young really did what he could. The vice chieftain bit his lips as he looked at Young's confident attitude. It doesn't seem like he is a normal goblin. All the goblins he knew were scaredy cats. However, Young was filled with confidence that all other goblins he had seen so far lacked. Of course, there were few who bragged and called themselves goblin kings, but no goblin could confidently stand in front of fire tars and express his opinion. Honestly, he didn't understand half of what Young had said. However, he understood Young's sincerity. And saw proof. A new method using the natural predators to solve a problem. Existing fire tars couldn't accept it. If it wasn't for him, they would have already cast him away. However, he saw hope in this new method. Tomorrow at this time, come to this place. I will tell you the results of a meeting with the tribe. The vice chieftain made his decision. Only he could deliver these matter to the chieftain and open a meeting. Since he was the one who made the promise, didn't he need to take responsibility for it? Young turned away after he coolly nodded. A war will start. The vice chieftain, who was gazing at Young's back, inwardly felt confused. You're telling us to move our village because a mere goblin said so? Do you, the vice chieftain, truly believe this nonsense? The resistance was strong. It was a meeting which was commenced with difficulty. The 6 elders flatly disagreed with his suggestion. He isn't a normal goblin. However, the vice chieftain firmly shook his head. He's still a goblin. He's an existence ranked way below us, fire tars. However, if that goblin can defeat one of our warriors, we will have to acknowledge that he isn't a mere goblin. A goblin to win against a fire tar? It wasn't possible. It would be the same if a goblin king showed up. The fire tars were the peak existence among the creatures living here. There was no one who could fight against them unless they were mirage rank monsters, which were rare. In other words, elders believe that the goblin isn't qualified. As the vice chieftain gathered others' opinions, the chieftains agreed. You're right. The goblin isn't the same rank as us. Who would believe in the words of a goblin who didn't prove his qualifications? Qualifications, they say. It was impossible for a goblin to win against a fire tar. However, if they wanted qualifications, it wasn't like there wasn't a way. Then will you change your minds if he takes and passes the warrior's trial, and prove himself? A goblin is going to partake in the warrior's trial? It's something that has never happened before. It was a negative response. The warrior's trial was one of the processes a fire tar had to pass to be acknowledged as a true warrior. There was no precedent of a goblin taking it in the past. Just when the vice chieftain was feeling frustrated, everyone's gazes all turned towards a certain part of the table. The possessor of the fiercest flames. The grand chieftain spoke as he looked around. Let's let him partake in the trial. We will try to listen to what he has to say when he passes the trial. The chieftains were all quiet. The grand chieftain's words were absolute. At least in this tribe. We need to respect those that have passed the trial. On the other hand, if he doesn't pass, he will not gain any power even if he is right. If what the vice chieftain saw is true, then that goblin will pass, but if he is wrong, he will die inside. The grand chieftain was testing the vice chieftain's judgment. The vice chieftain clenched his fists. However, if you just send him as he is, it's the same as just telling him to die. Let's lower the standard a bit and allow him to use the storage room, once like the other users. I will allow that much. The storage room was a place where the tribe had stacked up all the equipment they have earned from hunting and battles over the years. It was custom for the one taking the trial to choose an equipment from the place to use for the warrior's trial. Although there was only a slight chance for a mere goblin to pass the trial, he would still take that chance. The meeting concluded as the vice chieftain heavily nodded. And the next day had arrived. As soon as the day brightened, Muyang returned to the entrance of the village. At the same time, he was guided to a huge underground storage room. It's enormous. Muyang's eyes shined as he entered the storage room. A countless number of equipment and accessories were lined up along the endless walls in the storage room. Choose one. While the vice chieftain was watching him, Muyang looked around the equipment inside the storage room. There wasn't a single one that wasn't a masterpiece. There were big weapons for fire tars to use, but there were quite a lot that could be used by Muyang. An equipment to use when I attempt the warrior's trial. Not bad. On top of that, it would become much easier for him to roam around the demon god's territory after this. As of right now, it would have been impossible for him to fight against a fire tar, but since this was much easier than that, Muyang felt it was worth a try. That is. Muyang noticed a black aura coming from a direction after walking for a good while. It was similar to the aura that appeared when he used the Art of Death skill. As he walked closer, he found a belt made of bones lying on the floor. Name: Wicked Belt. Rank A. Classification: A. Keepable type. Durability: 6818. Restrictions: only the user with a necromancer type class will be able to check the effects. Effects: the belt which a wicked lich used. Asterisk intelligence +4. Asterisk wisdom +4. Asterisk all undead are strengthened by 5%. After rechecking it a few times, Muyang was astonished. This is quite good. Only necromancer type classes were able to see the effects. Equipment with restrictions like this were normally more effective than other equipment of the same rank. Undead strengthened by 5%. It was definitely not a small percentage. Even more, there was no limit on the number. After roaming around the storage room once, he grabbed the wicked belt as he realized it was most suited for him. I will choose this. Are you sure you will be okay with that? It doesn't seem so great. Vice Chieftain looked at him with disbelief. There were much more sparkling treasures in the storage room. He couldn't understand why Muyang chose a shabby belt made out of bones among all of these great treasures. This is enough. Don't regret it. The vice chieftain clicked his tongue as he headed out the storage room. But on the other hand, Muyang was very pleased. I never thought that I would get a real treasure. For Muyang, this belt was more valuable than any other treasure in the storage room. Next, Muyang headed towards a house right in the middle of the village. When he entered, he saw a large marble. Vice chieftain spoke. This is the marble of the trial. When you smear your blood and touch it, the trial will begin. Only the ones who pass will return. What happens when I don't pass? You will die or return insane. It was truly simple. Muyang took out a small knife and cut his finger. Soon blood drooled down. Do you have any advice? No more, no less, just block it 10 times. A fire tar that just became an adult have to do it 20 times, but you don't need to do more than that. His words were ambiguous. Muyang didn't think long. He nodded and stretched out his hand to touch the marble. Soon Muyang's body was sucked into the marble. Muyang looked around. A large arena stood in front of him. And from afar 100 goblins all armed with weapons were charging towards him. It was a sudden situation. However, Muyang wasn't taken back. Instead, the words that instantly appeared were more of an eyesore. The endless battlefield. This was also a place he learned about once humans started to explore this area. However, the endless battlefield was a place that would be discovered at least 10 years later. From what he remembered, many people challenged this place because they would be rewarded following the laws of Solomon depending on their results. Especially since the specific rewards were limited, the huge groups who knew about this basically monopolized it. He never thought that the marble was a way to get to the endless battlefield. Let's try it. Swoosh. Anguish let out a small cry. Screech. A group of goblins screamed out loud from afar. Goblins were the lowest-ranked monsters that lingered in the very bottom and were nothing but a prey to others. Muyang would be sufficient in handling 100 of them alone. However, Muyang tried his best even when killing the goblins. He instantly killed the goblins approaching him with all his undead. Try to keep as many corpses intact. Like the name, Endless Battlefield, implied, this was a place where an infinite number of monsters appeared. The more he blocked, the more difficult it became, and if he didn't end it at the right time, he could die in vain. It meant that he had to be good at hit and run, but Muyang was curious as to how far he could go. I have the 6 paths and Art of Death skills. From the 6 paths, the Azura path was a skill that allowed him to handle the crazy spirits. Even though he didn't have many under his control, using it with the Art of Death skill will allow him to display a much greater strength. Muyang was planning to make undead out of the monsters that appeared to prepare for the next wave. From just this, anyone could tell that the endless battlefield was a place meant for Muyang. I accept your orders. Swish. All the undead, including the blazing spear soldier, massacred the goblins. Leave one alive. A mere 100 goblins. It was like a light exercise after a meal. Although it took a bit longer as he ordered them to try and kill them with their bodies intact, most of the goblins were lying on the floor in less than 20 minutes. Screech. Screech. Muyang cut off the arms and legs of the last surviving goblin. After, he applied medicine to quickly stop the bleeding before he tossed it on the floor. He wasn't the type to enjoy torture, but it was necessary. A trick. The next wave would start when either all the monsters were killed or when a day had passed. When he partook the endless battlefield, one of his tactics was to keep the last monster alive. What was more, Muyang couldn't make many undead in a single day. Even if he used the C-rank Art of Death skill to the max, he could only use it 100 times. Afterwards, he needed to rest for at least a day. Muyang sat down for a moment after making the 99 monsters into undead. The monsters will strengthen greatly every 10 waves. Technically, Muyang never entered the endless battlefield. But Muyang knew that one had to enter the endless battlefield a different way each time, as that person would not be able to enter the same way again. I need to beat the 10th wave at least to get a good reward. In 5 years, the Great Calamity would be prophesized and the giant group would then finally get off their asses. Full-scale exploration of the unknown territories would start, and even then the endless battlefield would only be found after a good while later. After the discovery, The giant groups completely concealed the information and monopolized the rewards. Normal people found out about this much later when the groups had already swept up all the limited rewards. That was why information was important. Knowing was a strength and not knowing was a sin. I was lucky. He chuckled. It wasn't on purpose. He just thought he could get their favor by helping the fire tars. He never expected to enter the endless battlefield. However, he was only given one chance. He couldn't enter the endless battlefield again by using the marble. He needed to make the most out of this opportunity. We need to make traps by digging up the ground. Drag rocks to make a place for the Avengers to hide. As he ordered them, the undead worked in an orderly fashion. Then Myung sat down and tried to calm his body down. He was about to faint after using the Art of Death skill to the max. Slowly. Let's go as far as I can. It was an extremely advantageous battle for Myung. It was foolish to purposely push himself too far. Myung looked far past the 10 waves. The 5th wave were orcs, with gray skin. Orcs were low-ranked but were very powerful. They were violent and fierce and even lived in groups. They were quite difficult to fight against unless the person lived in the underworld for at least a year. Grail. However, the orcs couldn't help but be confused as soon as they appeared. A number of undead several times their size were gathered around them as they greeted them. Attack. Myung dominated them with his numbers. He finished the orcs off before they were lined up for battle by waiting for them at the starting point of the waves. The initial number of more than 300 undead finally increased to a number over 400. The numbers are starting to drop. After massacring the orcs, Myung counted the number of undead that were left. Overall, the number increased, but it didn't increase exponentially like it did so far. It was because he had lost a significant number of undead when fighting the orcs. But the effects of this wicked belt's good. Myung tapped the belt made of bones. One of the effects of the wicked belt was strengthening undead by 5%. Someone might think only 5%, but equipment that raised something by a percentage were extremely rare. A strengthening of 5% was considered quite a high level. It was like 100 monsters having the strength of 105 monsters. It was simple calculations, but as of now, when he had over 400 undead, it was like having 20 freebies. As the numbers increased, the effect of 5% would shine further. Besides, it wasn't like this wasn't the only equipment of its kind. If he could just obtain a Bone Dragon, Death Knight, or over Lich level top-ranked undead. Myung nodded as he thought that far. There's a long way to go. He could never say that the Myung right now was strong. He needed to become strong. His thirst for power hasn't been quenched. Myung had to face monsters. To kill a monster, they say that you had to become one. That was why Myung tried to become one. Let's clean up the corpses and reorganize. The 9th wave were gargoyles. Gargoyles were flying-type monsters. The damage was considerable, and the over 600 undead all of a sudden dropped to about 450. The 10th wave is the boss. The monsters that were known as bosses were always strong. Truthfully, if Myung was alone, he would have surrendered at the 7th or 8th wave. However, he was confident that he could fight the boss battle as he had hundreds of undead. Gather the bones. Myung gathered up all the bones of monsters he had killed so far. Myung gestured as he looked at the mountain made up of bones. Soon, dark aura surrounded the bones as he used the Art of Death skill. Let's make a golem. When the rank of Art of Death skill was low, he needed to sculpt them himself. However, now he could shape them just by drawing a mental image of it. Soon the bones assembled on their own to form a shape. A truly idiotic golem had been created. Myung was quite pleased. It was created into a figure he had in mind. He wished for it to pass an art score of 70, but as expected, it was a score that couldn't be easily broken with the materials and his imagination. Normally, bosses are prearranged unless if it was a special case. There is a high possibility that an orc war chief or a troll watch would appear. To fight against an orc war chief or a troll watch, a golem like this was necessary. Even if it was simply used to compete by strength and to buy some time. I will dominate the boss with the Black Sun Warrior. Myung turned his head and looked at the Death Warrior in full armor. The Black Sun Warrior was clearly managing the workload of many by himself. He was currently Muyang's strongest card. He was currently strengthened with the Sorceress of Lightning's rune buff and the Wicked Belt and was much more powerful. Any decent mid-ranked monster wouldn't be able to do anything in front of him. After a day passed, another wave had started. Orc War Chief. Its entire body was dark red and was 1.5 times bigger than a normal orc. It was holding a massive great sword and covered its face with bear hide. Dark red Orc War Chief? It wasn't a typical orc. Dark red. They seemed to be a level stronger than a typical orc group. He didn't know why it was unusual, but it was very different from what he expected. Muyang frowned as he gave out an order. Bone Golem, go. The rest suppressed the surrounding orcs. However, he couldn't just wait and see. Muyang took out Anguish and fought against the dark red Orc War Chief with his 450 undead. The Bone Golem shattered. The Black Sun Warrior was dangerously fighting against the Orc War Chief. The resistance was stronger than he thought. Not to the point of losing. However, Muyang made objective judgments about the situation. Although the impact was bigger than he expected, it wasn't enough for him to be defeated. It was definitely enough to be handled. Sorceress of Lighting, use your rune explosion. Then tens of undead bloated up and exploded. And on top of that, Muyang placed spirits. Azure Path. The crazy spirits and the explosion was an amazing combination. It was enough to make a low-rank undead suddenly change into a mid-rank. Of course, the drawbacks were that he could only use it once and that his body wouldn't be able to handle it if he used it on an important undead, but for now, it was enough to raise his military strength. After losing about half of his undead, Muyang was finally able to pierce Anguish into the head of the dark red Orc War Chief. Soon after, the Black Sun Warrior stabbed its side. Thump. A black light appeared as the Orc War Chief fell on the ground. This is... Muyang grabbed hold of the light as he stretched his hand out. Indeed, there really was a spirit of dark light. Like this, it seemed like he could add spirits if he killed special monsters. The conquest rate was terrible, but it was more important that the rate was constantly increasing. Who are you? At that moment, Muyang stepped back as he heard a voice next to him. A fairy. A small figure with 2 sets of dragonfly wings. The cute appearance was definitely a fairy. It's not yet the time for a human to step in here. Please stop here. Who are you? I'm the fairy who's in charge of the endless battlefield. In here I'm unbeatable, so it wouldn't be wise to be hostile towards me. And... The fairy cleared her throat. The tuning of the endless battlefield isn't completed. We are testing with monsters, but how did you enter here? And then she tilted her head. Well, it did seem a bit odd that Fire Tars had a marble that led to the endless battlefield. Even if they did call it the Warrior's Trial, they seemed like they didn't exactly know about the marble themselves. It seemed like they were tuning the level of difficulty with monsters like the Fire Tars. This was the reason why humanity could enter the endless battlefield about 10 years later. However, Muyang never heard that there was a fairy in charge of the endless battlefield. The fairy placed her hands on her hips and continued. If you get out now, I will give you a nice necklace. Let's see. She looked into her pouch and repeatedly took out different items and put them back in. Different items continuously came out as if it was an infinity pouch. Among them, there were some that were special and others that were normal. Fairies tended to be a bit dense. The fairy in front of him was the same. This. I don't need it. Muyang shook his head right away as the fairy took out a necklace. The fairy pouted her lips. Ah, why? This is really good. It's a B++ rank and a set item. I never knew you would be able to beat the dark red Orc War Chief. That's why I was specially giving it to you, so take it. After all, this will be your limit as a human. How many waves do I need to stop before I can earn a little wish? The fairy was startled and her eyes widened. However, Muyang caught a glimpse of the item when the fairy was looking through her pouch. The item that was shaped like a cloud. Will wish. It allowed 3 small wishes to be made. Of course, he couldn't ask for a huge wish that could disrupt the system. However, it was useful in various of different ways, from finding something, to tell the difference between a truth and a lie, and even increasing his stamina in the case of an emergency. Of course, it falls short of a wish, but depending on how I use it, it could definitely be worth having. Wish was one of the highest powers while Little Wish was a degraded version of it. The past during the final territorial war, so 30 years before Muyang was first summoned, one of the women revered as a saint used her own life as a medium to make a wish. It could literally be called a god's blessing as it displayed a strength so powerful that it stuck 2 demon gods to death. The highest power that took out tens of thousands of demon soldiers and brought small victory to humans. Afterwards, the saint's name carried power. The next saint hadn't appeared yet, but in 5 years, Snow would appear and prophesize the great calamity. With that, she would rally up the humans, but she died with the appearance of a legion of the demon god of the 64th seat Horrors. Muyang saw that scene right in front of his eyes. If the legion didn't kill the saint, I would have. That was Muyang's assignment. To kill the saint. However, Saint Snow wasn't able to use the highest power like the past saint. If she did use a wish, at least one of the Demon King's legions would have been demolished. He didn't know why. There were rumors floating that it was because Snow wasn't human. Snow was a mutant who had skin white as snow and wings of both the angel and the devil. Where she was born and where she came from, no one knew. Even Muyang didn't know. If it's Little Wish, I might be able to figure out who Snow is. Even if it was the degraded version of Wish, Little Wish was still an amazing tool in its own way. For 5 years, tens of thousands of clerics practiced together to just barely make one. From what he knew of, they stopped making them when they had about 3 made, as it wasn't worth the amount of effort that was needed. He never thought he would find one of the few in a place like this. It might be possible to reveal Snow's identity, which no one had ever found out about. The fairy calmed her expression and scratched her cheeks as she spoke. Ahem, this is a special reward. Special reward? I can't tell you the condition. Because I'm not allowed to just tell people. Then I'll get punished. What I can give you is just that necklace, that's the best I could do. Then you don't have to just tell me. Is there anything you want? There were a lot of uses for Little Wish. He could find the location of the Headley's cow and the specific whereabouts of where the other 2 rings that would release the S-rank weapon, Diabolos, were. Like with Headley's cow, he wasn't sure of the exact whereabouts of the other 2 rings, Oris's throne ring and Hamel's rune ring, even though he had the lunatic sovereign's ring. So it was more important than any other reward. As Muyang asked, the fairy laughed playfully. Woohee, I might let you know if you guess my name correctly. Muyang frowned. Fairies were normally very playful species. They were also the species which no one knew anything about. However, he could understand that the answer was quite simple just by talking with her for a bit. I need to keep talking with her. Muyang shrugged his shoulders. Although it didn't seem like she would say her name right away, she might let it slip as they continued their conversation. What's the reason for having you, a fairy, manage the endless battlefield? Shucks, is this your first time entering a trial like this? There should be quite a few places made by fairies. I don't really remember entering those places. It was true. After Muyang had finished his assassination training, he had been continuously running around assassinating people until he died. He never had time to enter a trial and clear it. The fairy became boastful. Well, you do look like a very weak human. Then I will specially explain it for you. When I make a successful trial and manage it, I can get a home. A home? That's it. What do you mean that's it? We fairies all don't have a home. We're all poor. But if fairies get a lot of homes, they can even make a castle and bridges to create a world. However, we fairies don't have anything right now. It seemed like she was trying to say that she had no home to go to. Her shoulders dropped and she pouted her lips. A new fairy king was born, but since we're all poor, so he doesn't have a home. We fairies need to work hard to get a home soon. Solomon promised that he will give us a home if we fairies make good trials and run them well. We can be free from being poor. Although he couldn't really understand what she was saying, he could see that she was desperate. Muyang thought that he probably had never heard of stories regarding fairies as they created and managed trials properly and earned their homes. They were adjusting the balance of the endless battlefield by using monsters to test them. Then most of the trial were probably made by fairies. No wonder. He thought that although the trials were meant to develop humans, they were too difficult. If these playful fairies made them, then he totally understood. Solomon is dead. Wouldn't you only earn a home when he is alive? Doesn't matter. He already stamped and signed it. Even after his death, if we fairies just keep our promise, then we get it. We fairies are poor and have nothing to lose, so we will act even more aggressively to get it. Amazing. Woo-hee-hee. She seemed like she was weak to compliments. Myung looked around the endless battlefield and spoke. This is well made. You should be able to earn a home soon. Of course. I will certainly earn a home and be free from being a poor. He could felt her overflowing will. What are you going to call your home? She made a wide smile as if she was imagining it in her head for a moment. I don't fall for those leading questions. However, she instantly placed a serious look on her face. Myung clicked his tongue in disappointment. I can only try to lead her while talking to her like this. But at least she didn't plan on leaving. Even if she puffed out her cheeks like she was tricked, it seemed like even the fairy had something she was curious about. But are you really going to try and block the next wave too? The trial isn't balanced completely, so you might die. I will do it. The fire tar told him that he just needed to block the 10th wave. However, Myung was planning to stop at least the 15th wave. The rewards change after the 15th wave. He was planning to find out about the special reward was in the meantime. There will be waves that won't work even if you have a lot of undead. Good luck. It's quite fun to watch a foolish human die. You have bad taste. Woo-hee-hee. Sis. Myung frowned. Only 12 hours had passed, but the next wave had started all of a sudden. She said they didn't finish the balancing the trial. The endless battlefield wasn't smooth yet. Could definitely be different from what he remembered. The monsters that appeared as soon as the wave started were strong. Werewolves were quick and fast. A normal undead wouldn't be able to catch up to them. On top of that, the arc goblins were mutants born under the holy blessing. Get up. Crunch. Growl. Myung woke all his undead up. In total 312. It was heartbreaking to have lost about a half of his undead during the 10th wave. However, it wasn't only a bad thing. Dark Red Orc War Chief. Myung looked at the dark red orc war chief that was swinging its greatsword at a werewolf in the front. The art score the orc war chief received was 68. Maybe because its score was low, or maybe because it didn't have a great story compared to the Dark Sun Warrior, but it did have a drive greater than anyone else. Blazing Spear Soldier, you will kill the Arc Goblins with me. I understand. The Arc Goblins with the Holy Blessing were the natural enemies of undead. Myung that the Spear Soldier who was still alive, and himself would be able to fight more freely than the rest. There were 5 completely white albino goblins mixed into the werewolves. Myung took a deep breath and wore the Lunatic Sovereign's set and swung Anguish. He was able to complete the 13th wave, the 14th wave, and finally the 15th wave. However, the situation wasn't great even though he was on a roll. Now he only had about 200 undead. If he continued, the important undead that Myung made could all disappear. The reason was clear. Arc Goblins. The Art of Death skill didn't work on the Arc Goblins that received the Holy Blessing. Since they couldn't be turned into undead, they didn't help increase his military strength. It could only be exhausting as they were contrasting attributes. However, as the difficulty increased, the numbers increased as well. Wow. Did you block the 15th wave? You really are amazing. Even if you used your undead, it would have been very difficult. The fairy continuously watched Myung fight as she strolled around him. If I didn't fight against the Arc Goblins, this would have been over already. Myung knew exactly what he needed to do. That it was most efficient for him to take care of the Arc Goblins. Is there be a chance that the wait time between the waves will get shorter? Woohee, I can't tell you information about the endless battlefield. If you're scared, you can stop now. I think I can go a bit further. Do you really want to die? Well, it's good for me as I have more to see. Myung chuckled. He could not feel any ill will from the fairy. It was in their nature. Name. A name, huh? Then Myung decided to deduce what the fairy's name could be. The past few days he thought of a few candidates for what her name could be. There was no way that she would suddenly ask him to guess what her name might be. She probably thought that he could guess her name correctly through their conversation. There was always an answer to a trial. And if a fairy made it, the answer had to be within their conversations up until now. Could it be? However, the candidates he had narrowed down so far were all guesses. But there was nothing else to learn from the conversation. He had to make a decision. Isn't it? What is? Your name. The fairy's eyes widened. How did you know? Seemed like he was correct. Young shook his head as if he was at a loss for words. I didn't think a fairy's name would be hard to guess. Fairies are known to not tell their names to anyone, but their actions are very flawed. I thought that there was no need to let someone know about it when they kept saying their names out loud. You're right. My name is Wuhi. Because I laughed Wuhi. When I was born I became Wuhi. The fairy Wuhi's shoulders sank low. It truly was the simplest way to recognize her name. Myung calmly asked. What's the condition for the special reward? It was time to hear about the conditions in earning Little Wish. Wuhi twirled her hair with her finger as she spoke. You wouldn't be able to even if I told you. Stop talking nonsense and speak. You need to stop 3 waves continuously in a condition where you're barely alive. Indeed, he understood why she said he couldn't do it if he knew. Maybe if it was in the beginning, but as of right now when he was on his 15th wave, it probably was impossible to fulfill that condition. However, Myung nodded. Myung could get even stronger when he is in a state where he was barely alive. Lunatic warrior. Stir up the battlefield after becoming a crazed warrior. He didn't know if it was possible, but he had to make it possible even if wasn't. Stop at least 3 waves while you're barely alive. Then it would start the moment he was on the brink of death. He had to get into that state before the next wave to be able to properly stop 3 waves in a row. As it was a special reward, he couldn't leave an ambiguous record. Self-injury. The first method he thought of was self-injury. If it was regarding body parts, Myung was an expert. It wasn't hard to leave someone barely alive. When he trained in the Forest of Death, a forceful command to commit suicide once his identity was revealed was implanted in his mind. Countless assassins died following the command Wang Chunglin implanted in them. My body's resisting. Was it because of this? Myung placed anguish close to his wrist before shaking his head slightly. He wasn't willing to. Perhaps it was due to him deciding to walk the path against Wang Chunglin that his body cried out as it instinctively wanted to do everything opposite of what Wang Chunglin did. What was more, this was a battlefield. It was a place created for battles. To self-inflict wounds wasn't self-injury but closer to suicide. Black Sun Warrior. So Myung decided on another solution. Since he was going to be on the brink of death anyways, he chose a slightly more honest method. The Black Sun Warrior who wore a full black armor gazed at Myung. He was the strongest undead Myung had and was the best rising star of the Sun Guild when he was alive. Wasn't he named after the sun god Horus? If Myung didn't kill him, he would have rapidly become stronger. However, currently he was an undead that followed Myung. Myung held anguish up towards the Black Sun Warrior and said, Attack me like you want to kill me. There wasn't a moment of hesitation. The Black Sun Warrior cast the Sword of the Black Sun skill from his hands. He shot towards Myung while emitting an aura that wanted to slash everything in the world. Although he was stronger than when he fought Horus, the Black Sun Warrior had also been strengthened. Crush. Myung, who clashed with the sword, was pushed away. He immediately held anguish in reverse and lowered his stance. Then he bounced off the ground and aimed for the Black Sun Warrior's belly. Thump. The wings of the Black Sun Warrior blocked Myung's attack. However, Myung anticipated that. The Black Sun Warrior's sword shot out between his wings of light. Myung rolled on the ground and quickly threw 2 daggers in a row. But it only looked like he threw 1 dagger. It was only possible because the paths the 2 daggers were flying in were identical. Fling. Fling. The first dagger broke in 2, but the second one was blocked by the armor. If it wasn't for the armor, it would have been a critical blow. His high defense wasn't just for show. In reality, he barely received any damage when facing the dark red orc war chief. Not bad. He had never fought against one of his undead. He never really felt the need to, and he thought that it would be much better to hunt other prey than wounding his undead. A completely new experience. Myung became absorbed into the fight. It had been quite a while since he had fought one-on-one. Because Myung's profession specialized in one-on-one fights, it felt like he had only just put on the right set of clothes. Let's see how long you can block. The Black Sun Warrior had high defense. He wouldn't leave a scratch with most of his attacks. Didn't even the dark red orc war chief fail to leave a decent mark? Muyang used all his techniques. Bam. Push. The intense fight continued for hours. The fairy Wuhi was stunned as she watched the Black Sun warrior and Muyang fight. Ahem, was the condition so hard he went crazy? She touched her lips with her finger and tilted her head. She could only see it as him going crazy. In a situation where it wasn't enough that they were saving all their strength, they were fighting each other. A bloody battle with no compromises. It wouldn't be weird if one of them died. However, something strange occurred. The more they fought, the faster their movements became. It was only a slight difference, but Wuhi, who had seen countless monsters, could tell that they were growing every time their swords clashed. But can the undead get stronger too? Then Wuhi, who had realized something strange, blinked her eyes. Even if she could accept Muyang's growth as humans had rapid growth potential, the undead were monsters created from corpses. A dead creature wouldn't get stronger. Like that, the undead would stop growing from when they died. But when that undead wearing black armor clashed with Muyang, he was getting stronger at a slightly slower pace than him. It wasn't that he became more skilled, but his absolute stats were rising. Wuhi. Fight, fight. The winning side is Wuhi's side. But afterwards her worries melted away like snow. Wuhi cheered while flailing her arms and legs around. Wuhi wasn't the type to worry for long. The two fought to kill. She was satisfied as long as she could see this entertaining scene. How long did they fight for? When Muyang's body was becoming a rag, a new change appeared. Black Sun Warrior has increased his strength by 1. Black Sun Warrior has increased his agility by 1. Messages that made even Muyang, who was absorbed in the fight, stop for a bit. Stop. Muyang raised his hand and restrained him. Immediately the Black Sun Warrior stood in his place. Muyang frowned. He grew stronger? It didn't make sense. Although it wasn't like there weren't any undead who could get stronger, it was extremely rare. There were monsters like vampires who grew stronger by sucking blood, or monsters like specters who increased their spirit power by extorting their enemies' lives. In other words, monsters who had an appetite. However, the Black Sun Warrior was different. He was getting stronger simply by fighting against Muyang. But this never happened when he fought others. That was right. If there was a cause, it was fighting with Muyang. Did I affect him? To make sure of this, he changed his target. Blazing Spear Soldier, Sorceress of Lighting. Attack me. I will follow your orders. The two had become his enemies. Although his body was already exhausted, Muyang was like a fish in water as he fought without rest. However, as his vision became hazy, Muyang couldn't help but find it odd. Only the Black Sun Warrior grew stronger. No matter how long he fought with the Blazing Spear Soldier or the Sorceress of Lightning, their stats didn't increase. As he wondered why, Muyang came to a conclusion. Art score. Only the Black Sun Warrior had an art score greater than 80. Then did it mean that only those who had an art score above 80 could get stronger like him? This was a very important discovery. If his hypothesis was correct, then Muyang would be able to create a much stronger undead army. In the very least, he would try harder to create an undead with an art score of 80 or higher. If they grew stronger by fighting with Muyang, it was definitely one of the hidden abilities of the Death Lord. So I was thinking inside the box. Then he smiled bitterly. If he didn't have a prejudice that the undead couldn't grow, he might have figured it out already. Are you really going to face the next wave in that state? No matter how I look at it, it seems stupid. I'm going to. Muyang immediately replied to Wuhi's question. However, his whole body was bleeding. He was suffering from blood loss and his mind was fuzzy. He was really on the brink of death. However, he barely held his sword and found the strength to move. Wuhi clicked her tongue. Recklessness is the shortcut to death. Though your growth rate is outstanding considering you're a human. Seems like you have become sharper in a few hours. It is interesting. 40 years. Huh. It took me 40 years to get to where I am. You became stronger in a short time. You're abnormal. These words were directed at Muyang. But Muyang wanted to disagree. The past 40 years of experience and information created the current Muyang. If an artist who drew for 40 years was to draw an incredible picture in 5 minutes, people would normally react with, "You completed in 5 minutes. You're amazing." But the artist had spent 40 years to produce that picture in 5 minutes. It was the same for Muyang. It was only obvious that he would grow quickly because he had already experienced power once. In the very least, he would be able to catch up to his previous self without rest. "You are a weird human. Anyways, try your best." Wu He circled around in the air with her arms crossed. Not long after, the next wave began. "I will make the impossible possible." Muyang's eyes settled down. Sis. The fairy Wu He couldn't believe it. Is that really a human? What in the world? With a body that seemed like it would fall with a touch, he really beat the 16th wave. Though the undead did help a lot, Muyang's performance was the same if not better than before. Still, this must be his end. Wu He shook her head. It seemed like a special skill was activated when he was in a critical condition, but even that would end here. The next monsters would be trolls. They had a terrifying regenerative power. And like expected, the fight was long. The undead were stomped on and Muyang's arm was twisted as it hung on one side. It was amazing that he even endured it. But another reversal happened. Impossible. He annihilated the trolls. And Muyang challenged the next wave right away. Since he knew that there wouldn't be a good end if he stayed in a critical condition for a long time, he quickly challenged one wave after the other, unlike before. However, no matter how times you thought about it, it was impossible. His body was at its limit. Well, he could tell that even breathing was painful. He pushed his body with only raw determination. He has surpassed the limits of a warrior. It's like he's someone who had died a few times. Those who were known as warriors had a tendency to become stronger when they were on the brink of death. Muyang had already passed that. Unless he was someone to moved within the boundaries of death, it was impossible to move like that. Wu He slowly changed from watching Muyang's fight for fun to watching it with a nervous heart. With sweaty fists and bulging eyes, she didn't miss a single moment of the fight. It was the first time she felt this way while watching someone fight. "You can do it, human. You can do it." Unconsciously, her eyes were drawn to fight as she cheered for him. Whenever Muyang's body stretched, Wu He's body felt sore. To make spectators become completely immersed in it. It was one of the qualities only those known as heroes possessed. Flush. The fight ended as the last arc goblin's neck was cut off. Thump. Muyang fell to his knees. He stabbed anguish into the ground and was barely able to stop himself from fainting. In that state, he forced himself up and approached Wu He. "Give it to me." Here. Wu He took out a cloud-shaped tool with a foolish expression. Little wish. He had finally reached his goal. A treasure that would grant 3 small wishes. Afterwards, Muyang examined the condition of his body. Any more would be tough. Although he could use Little Wish to recover his body, he didn't think he could beat the 20th wave with his current abilities. Less than 100 undead remained. Perhaps it was because the troll's vitality was strong, but it wasn't easy to make them into undead. At most, he could cast the Art of Death skill 15 times. With that, he would still be lacking. Wu He asked, "You're going to end here, right?" "Looks like it. Come back next time. You can get an incredibly special reward when you beat the 30th wave." The 30th wave, she said. It was currently too far away. But he didn't remember hearing about anyone stopping the 30th wave and getting an incredibly special reward. When he glanced at Wu He, her face reddened as she wriggled her body. "Wu He, you can have me. Give me something else." "Damn it, I bet you don't know how popular I am with other fairies." Muyang only grinned. However, he couldn't promise when he would return to the endless battlefield. He couldn't return the same way he came in this time. If he wanted to return to the endless battlefield, he had to find something else besides the marble the fire tars had. Wu He continued. "Make sure you come again. I will be waiting for you." As if she suddenly became lonely, Wu He nodded weakly. Then Wu He suddenly pressed her lips against Muyang's cheek. Immediately after, a bright light wrapped around Muyang. Endless Battlefield 18th stage has been added to your history. 1. No name 18th stage. 2. None. 3. None. He bounced out of the marble. At the same time, he stumbled as a wave of dizziness came over him. He had a critical injury that made one wonder how he didn't die on the spot. If he didn't quickly heal himself, it couldn't be reversed. The goblin returned. The fire tar who stood beside the marble yelled out loud. Soon the vice chieftain came to see Muyang. He raised his shoulders and murmured to himself. 18th wave. The number 18 was written on Muyang's left shoulder. A number like this was written on everyone who entered the endless battlefield and completed the waves. The vice chieftain looked at the number with doubtful eyes. He never thought a mere goblin would have exceeded beyond the 10th wave. Even a goblin king would reach his limit on the 15th wave. But Muyang was here and had advanced way past the criteria he provided him. The mood changed. Other fire tars were no longer able to disregard Muyang. Start the treatment for the goblin, know the warrior. They couldn't allow someone who was recognized as a warrior to die in vain. Warriors had the right to be properly respected. The fire tars held an emergency meeting. The goblin had completed the 18th wave of the warrior's ceremony? How unbelievable. He didn't even faint when he was getting treated. In that condition? Instead, didn't he threaten the vice chieftain as he glared at him? I saw it too. He said to keep his promise if vice chieftain was a fire tar of honor. Then he kept his eyes on the fire tars. He seemed like he didn't trust anyone. Impudent. Did he think one of our fire tars was going to hurt him? Since he has passed the warrior's ceremony to that extent, he needs to be treated as a warrior. Ugh. A goblin being treated as a warrior? There was no precedent for it in the past. And because of what they have already said, they couldn't take it back now. They never expected a goblin like him among the goblins they have looked down on and disregarded. The wind has changed. The vice chieftain was pleased as he looked at the scene. The goblin did well. He really did stir up the stubborn elders. Let's hear about his suggestion. Since he has proven himself as a warrior, it mustn't be just a lie that he could fix the problem with the pum tree. Do you, vice chieftain, really believe he can solve this? That it's right for us to move our village? Of course, there were still those who opposed. There was no way them to easily accept the idea of them moving their village. However, they weren't furious like how they were when it was first brought up. It was a tremendous development. As the vice chieftain, my thoughts are we need to listen to what the warrior has to say. To be honest, it's not like we can just be laid back about it. At most 10 years from now. After that time, we need to wander around until we find another pum tree. The vice chieftain stroked the long roots around his waist. It was the roots of the pum tree. Without this root, the fire tar would not be able to overcome their own flames and in the end, would self-destruct. They had to periodically replace it, but if they couldn't find the next pum tree in time, the whole tribe would be wiped out. It would be a disgrace for the monster of all monsters, the fire tars, to die this way. However, pum trees were rapidly dying out in the underworld. Only God knew when they might be able to find another. What if he is wrong? We will be humiliated by the other tribes. The vice chieftain crumbled his expression in frustration. On the other hand, if we succeed, the fire tars of other tribes will look at us differently. We might be a bit humiliated if we fail, but there is a lot more to gain than lose. On top of that, these frustrating people. The vice chieftain truly did think that. They were warriors who thought their honor was more important than their life. Although he understood them, this problem took priority over their honor. The pum tree. The mother of this land. What conditions are needed to treat our mother? That's enough. The chieftain, who quietly watched the whole scene, suddenly spoke. Everyone, including the vice chieftain, became quiet. Then the chieftain nodded. I will listen to what the goblin has to say. If he is telling the truth, we will treat him as a warrior and our savior, but if he is lying, I will personally punish him. Gulp. There was tension in everyone's expressions. When the chieftain said that he would personally punish someone, it meant that he would end them with a duel. It had been ages since he last dueled anyone. However, everyone knew of the chieftain's power. The absolute fire tar who couldn't be beaten even against 10 regular fire tars. If he was to come forward, there was no hope for even a great goblin. The only way for the goblin to live was to prove that he was right. After the treatment was complete, Muyang got up from his spot right away. He was given a bit of free time, but he wasn't really tense. Instead, he was organizing the things he earned from the endless battlefield with his mind at ease. Little Wish, Fairy's Blessing, Hermes's Boots, and the Talisman of Ogre's Strength. For in total, from the random A-rank talismans, he received the Talisman of Ogre's Strength. It was quite a rare talisman that allowed you to strengthen an equipment. Hermes's Boots. Little Wish and the Talisman were things he was somewhat familiar with, but the other two were things even Muyang hadn't seen before. Hermes's boots were jet black. As he looked carefully at the boots to confirm it, information regarding the boots popped up. Name: Hermes's Boots. Rank A+. Classification: A. Type. Durability: 24,000. Effect: Shadow Lord's Present. It was one of the shoes Hermes wore. Asterisk agility +15. Asterisk able to use acceleration for 3 seconds. The information shown was simple. Plus rank. It was the highest ranked equipment Muyang currently possessed. On top of that, Muyang became slightly more surprised reading the last message. Acceleration. Muyang knew about acceleration more than anyone else. It was because it was an ability that allowed you to move your body twice as fast. In the past, Muyang had used an equipment with acceleration to assassinate the Dragon Lord. Wang Chunglin had lent it to Muyang and its effects were amazing. It was only 3 seconds, but 3 seconds were enough to turn the tables around. Plus 15 in agility can't be ignored either. Like the word itself, it was the number that showed the body's agility, but if you thought one step further, it placed high importance in increasing the scope of a person's senses. Most would call it the 5 senses. The senses that allow you to detect danger and notice an enemy approaching from behind. Agility was an important stat, especially for Muyang. He wore the Hermes's boots right away. I should check out what Fairy's Blessing is. It was the blessing that appeared as Wuhi kissed his cheek. It was the first time he had seen it, so he was more curious. He turned the status viewer and opened it right away. Achievement effect dash. Grimoire's Anguish, A. +3 to all abilities. Soulmate B+. From now on, if you commune with an undead, the undead stats will slightly increase permanently. Azura's Vassal, A. The strength to deal with spirits and devil's power. Spirit ability increased by 10. Fairy's Blessing B. Allows fairies to feel familiar with the user. Class effect dash. Death Lord, Lord class, Ruler of Death. Sets dash. Strength 90, 67 plus 23. Agility 104, 71 plus 33. Stamina 96, 68 plus 28. Intelligence 56, 34 plus 22. Wisdom 60, 38 plus 22. Fighting Aura 60, 42 plus 18. Magic Resistance 30, 12 plus 18. Spirit Ability 38, 10 plus 28. Special note: Fighting Aura has been awakened. Equipped and invoked equipment. Anguish, Strength +5. Lunatic Sovereign set. All stats +15, stamina +10. Shadow Armor, it allows you to teleport to a shadow within your vision 3 times a day. Wicked Belt, Intelligence and Wisdom +4. All undead are strengthened by 5%. And Hermes's Boots, Agility +15, 3 seconds of acceleration. Allows fairies to feel familiar with the user. I need to meet one to know what kind of blessing it is. Muyang shrugged his shoulders. He felt like he could only know its effects only when he met one. And his agility stats passed 100 as he wore the Hermes's boots. It was the same as him passing through 1 out of 5 walls. Of course, his pure stats were far away, but if you just simply looked at it, it did pass 100. Also, if his main stats all passed 500, they say that he could become a transcendent being. Even in his past, Muyang wasn't able to enter the area of transcendent beings. To say it correctly, he was half of a transcendent being. Since his agility did pass 500. Thanks to this, he succeeded in assassinating the Dragon Lord. Although it took him few years to find that one chance. Goblin, the time is up. Vice Chieftain came into the room Muyang was in. Muyang nodded and raised his body. But Goblin, what's your name? Muyang. Muyang, I'm Ogre. The Vice Chieftain, Ogre, lightly introduced himself. It was a simple exchange, but the meaning wasn't as simple. At least it meant that Ogre was considering Muyang as a true warrior. If you solve the problem of the Pum tree, we will consider you as our savior. Muyang chuckled after listening to his words. The savior of a monster. It's interesting. But even that didn't seem bad at all. Muyang restated what he had told Ogre. He brought the bugs and provided evidence in a blunt manner. Silver tongue? There was no way Muyang would have such a thing. He just spoke the truth. However, that truth and the small evidence created an unexpected change. With a fierce look in his eyes, the Fire Tar chieftain declared that he would move the village. And after exactly 10 days, visible improvements had appeared. The Plutonian beetle hatched its eggs and hundreds of its babies were eating up the aphids. Not only that, but birds started to fly in to eat up the giant aphids which grew without any natural predators. Of course they would need more time, but in just 10 days the Pum tree became more lustrous. The dying leaves gave out a green color and the surrounding ground became more fertile. Looking at the amazing result, the Fire Tars were happy on one side but couldn't help but taste bitter emotions on the other. As it was proof that their existence was killing the Pum tree. They never expected Muyang to use natural predators to solve the problem. No, it was never thought of. From the beginning, the Fire Tars never had any natural predators. There was no way that they would think about using that relationship. A goblin who came out of nowhere suddenly became their savior. Do you have anything you want? Now all the Fire Tars couldn't help but acknowledge him. As the noises settled down, the chieftain personally came to Muyang. This land has been very unkind to me. I want to hunt a prey that's suited for me and become stronger. Muyang restated what he had said in the past. First, I need to hunt a bit. This was the territory of the demon god. There was no way for Fire Tars to keep an eye on him all the time. He needed to get stronger by himself to survive in this dangerous land. However, the levels of all the monsters in the demon god's territory were high. It wasn't an unexplored region for nothing. Humans had pushed exploring this area aside because they would have to endure a considerable amount of losses if they were to enter it. Therefore he had to search for prey that was suited for him. To become even a bit stronger. It was the first problem Muyang had to solve. The next day. As the day brightened, the Fire Tars started their mass migration. Their ability to carry out actions was outstanding. However, Ogre remained. You are our tribe's savior. I can't send you away like this. A monster of huge flames. He spoke as he smiled mischievously. There has always been someone to mentor a young Fire Tar. But I never mentored anyone before. You should be honored to have this chance. Coach? I don't need one. You just need to tell me the location where I can find some prey. Muyang was cold towards him. If someone with a large presence like Ogre followed him around, even prey that would usually approach him would run away. However, Ogre explained how useful he was as if Muyang misunderstood. Are you sure? We Fire Tars control fire. Fire is a basic element and is essential to living creatures. With me there, you will improve twice as fast. Are you saying that there is a Fire Tars method of training? You could say it like that. They had their own method of training. There really wasn't much known about the Fire Tars. Even though the Fire Tars were high-ranked monsters, even the top-ranked monsters would try to avoid them as they had the tendency to move in groups. There weren't any groups that would recklessly attack a group of Fire Tars. Even when humans moved in large groups, they would avoid and go around Fire Tars' territory as Fire Tars wouldn't attack first as long as they didn't bother them or enter their territory. It's getting interesting. Ogre was full of confidence. He really didn't seem like he was lying. Hey, I allow you to. Allow me? Ogre stuttered as he was dumbfounded. He couldn't be blamed. Would he, the vice chieftain, the second in command, have ever been treated this way? Even the elders couldn't act like this to him. However, the goblin in front of him was his tribe's, the Fire Tars' savior. The Fire Tars would be free from their chronic problem if the method of using natural predators spread. There would be no need for useless wars to steal or to take away a Pum tree. This one goblin saved tens of thousands of Fire Tars. Therefore, the goblin in front of him had the right to speak bluntly like that. Damn goblin. If it was some other Fire Tar or another goblin, the vice chieftain wouldn't have left him alive. He would have ripped his mouth and stepped on him like a bug. However, Ogre suppressed his anger. His honor as a fire tar would weep if he went back on his words. Ahem, follow me. There is an opponent right for you. No wild beast approached them as Muyang walked with Ogre. Even in the territory of the darkness, the fire tar's existence was one of a kind. Over there on top of the hill, there is a nest of a blue-horned lizard. Catch it and bring me its heart. Ogre stretched his arm to point to a high cliff. In the middle of the cliff there was a huge nest. Ogre crossed his arms, as if he wasn't going to help him any further. Muyang nodded as moved forward. It's a bit tough but I can handle it. Shaw. At that moment the huge lizard lifted its body from its nest and looked towards Muyang's direction. It ferociously glared at Muyang as if it was going to consider him as an enemy if he approached any further. Asterisk, a blue-skinned lizard with 2 horns stuck deep inside its skull. Asterisk, it has frost breath. Strength 80, 120, agility 95, 135, stamina 80, 100. Intelligence 50-70, wisdom 50-70. Asterisk, there could be a margin of error depending on the individual. It was the normal stats for an adult blue-horned lizard. Of course, there were some that exceeded that, but normally their stats were within that range. If he compared his current stats to it, it was worth a try. It would have been a bit easier if he used his undead, but he wasn't planning to. After all, this hunt was made himself get stronger. Swish. Muyang took out Anguish and entered the territory of the lizard. Shreya. Immediately, the blue lizard left its nest and quickly charged towards Muyang as if it was sliding. Cold air spewed out from its open mouth. Hop. Muyang held his breath as his body disappeared in a blink of an eye. At the same time he appeared behind the lizard. Shadow teleportation. The usable effect of the shadow armor. The effects that allowed the user to teleport to a shadow within their vision 3 times a day was activated. However, the lizard had great senses. Instantly, it turned its body and swung its horns at Muyang. Push. Muyang barely blocked its attack, but his hands were trembling fiercely. Muyang clenched his teeth as he rushed in again. Its left side is its weak point. The lizard was slightly limping its left leg. If you didn't look carefully, you would have missed it, but Muyang was able to notice it. He constantly turned towards its left and continued to look for an opening. Like this he struggled for 3 hours playing cat and mouse. Zep. Anguish sliced into the lizard's body. Afterwards he took out the heart and returned to Ogre. Ogre looked at Muyang as if it was very unexpected. It seemed like you struggled quite a bit for a goblin who passed the 18th wave. Muyang didn't bother replying. Considering the nature of warriors, the vice-chieftain might be disappointed if he knew that Muyang controlled dead corpses. It wasn't something Muyang needed to try and explain if it wasn't necessary. Either way, eat that heart. And turn around and sit down. You want me to just eat this? Yes. You need to chew it and eat it raw. The blue-horned lizard's heart was big. It was the size of Muyang's head. To eat this, even if it was the underworld, if he was a normal human he would have freaked out. However, Muyang took a bite out of the heart as if there was nothing unusual about it. Crunch. Blood spread inside his mouth. It's cold. Perhaps it was because it was a lizard that used frost, or maybe it was because it was a monster with low body temperature but its blood was really cold. As he slowly chewed it, Ogre was surprised. You eat well even though it doesn't look or taste good. It's a food even fire tar warriors won't eat. This is nothing. The lizard's heart tasted horrible. However, Muyang could eat and gulp down anything that was edible, whatever it was. He didn't put much importance on how the food tasted, since he didn't know the delight of eating. Thump, thump. After eating all of it, including the last sinew, Muyang turned around and sat down. Ogre placed his hand on Muyang's back with a disgusted expression. Close your eyes and calmly accept the flame. Slowly it will balance out your unbalanced body. It's going to be painful, but you mustn't open your mouth. Balance. Although Muyang didn't know what the vice-chieftain was going to do, he just closed his eyes like he was told. Blaze. Soon a small flame started to spread from Muyang's back. The flames entered the back of his body and helped the heart of the lizard find its place inside his body. A different kind of energy stirred up inside his body. Ogre's flames removed the impurities in his body. However, the pain was so great that it even made Mu-young flinch. He didn't spit out a word as he tightly clenched his teeth as if they were going to crumble apart. How many hours passed? It's done. Ogre got up as he wiped his brows. Amazing. Even 9 out of 10 warriors normally groan. Didn't you say that I can't? You're right. If you breathe out, the good energy will leave your body. Balancing a body can only be done once or twice in a lifetime. If you groan out loud, the balance will be slightly off. Say that first. Mu-young spoke with a pale face. He never thought that the vice chieftain would tell him the most important information after everything had ended. It's more valuable when you attain it yourself. Ogre rotated his shoulders as if it was nothing, and then opened his mouth to speak. Rest for today, and tomorrow we will work on the next part. Is there still more to do? There is about 2 more things to do. After you finish these, you will notice how much you have changed yourself. Mu-young flopped down onto the ground. With a completely exhausted face, his whole body felt weak. The next day, Mu-young hunted the typhoon stingrays that flew in the sky. As he tried to eat the heart he finally managed to get, Ogre stopped him. You can't just eat the heart of a typhoon stingray. You need other ingredients. What are the ingredients that I need? Sinful poisonous mushroom, 5 ptomaine stringy snakes, and 1 frog of despair. Mu-young wrinkled his expression as he heard the ingredients. Are you trying to assassinate someone? They were all extremely poisonous. They were living creatures that were so poisonous that they could instantly kill an elephant if it ate one. If he ate a mixture of them, his body would become all mushy and melt away. Ogre pondered as he understood Mu-young's thoughts. We fire tars do it like this. However, if it's a goblin you could die, I guess. If you want, I can reduce the amount of ingredients. No, it's okay. Let's just do it. Mu-young shook his head. Of course, there was a physical difference between Mu-young and fire tars, but he could control some of poison to a certain degree himself. I recently figured out that the spirits of the 6 paths like poison. To be exact, they liked objects of Yin energy like poison, but it was possible to cover the spirits with poison and launch an attack as long as he had enough of it. Like how the fire tars would burn poison, the spirits Mu-young had could take some of the poison away. He thought it was well worth a try. Don't regret it. Mu-young slightly laughed as he gathered the ingredients. After mixing all the ingredients together, there was only 1 step left. Lastly, we fire tars include the essence of the fire tar tribe. There are different ranks of essences as well, but since you're our savior, I will use the high-rank essence for you. He took out a small bottle as if he was being generous. Then he poured in the unidentified essence into the bin which contained the other ingredients. You need to brace yourself, since you will die if you lose consciousness. This was something Mu-young would do with his life on the line. Mu-young nodded as he sat on the hot desert ground. Gulp, gulp. Then he gulped down all the ingredients. At the same time, Mu-young's whole body became pale and emitted a purple light. The most poisonous out of the most poisonous. They were very rare poisons that could only be gathered in a demon god's territory. It would have taken Mu-young years to even collect these if he didn't have the help of Ogre, who knew the locations of every poison. However, they were too strong. Ogre was adjusting with his flames, but it wasn't enough. It was a relief that his mushy body didn't instantly melt down. 6 paths. A bit of time was enough. Afterwards, the spirits started to roam around Mu-young's body. Almost as if they were devouring a delicious meal, they sucked massive amounts of poison. Poison shade? A shade was a physical form of a normal spirit. It seemed like it threw away its original shape as it sucked in an enormous amount of dangerous poison. However, he couldn't continue his thoughts any longer. That wasn't the end. Mu-young's body continued to bloat up and sink down repeatedly. Ugh. It was too painful to endure. Something strange was happening inside his body. The impurities that couldn't be burned up were being eaten by the poison. Afterwards, his body started to reconstruct itself at a cellular level. Metamorphosis. The phenomenon where bones and structures changed completely. They say that you would normally go through this when you overcame your limits. Mu-young was in the process of metamorphosing without overcoming his limits. He tried his best to not lose consciousness. Then, after his body had been emptied out, a new wave filled Mu-young's body up. Soon, a peony-shaped light bundle shining brilliantly in various colors appeared on Muyang's forehead. Ogre, who saw this, widened his eyes. The flower of glory. The flower that only bloomed in only 1 in 1,000 fire tars was on the goblin's forehead. How could he not be surprised? The light bundle fully bloomed, then penetrated inside Muyang's body. Thump. Everything was progressing and Muyang lost his consciousness. Ogre looked at Muyang with a complex expression. Ha, this bastard wasn't a goblin. And as if he had received a blow, he laughed vigorously. Sizzle, sizzle. He heard something boiling. Muyang slowly opened his eyes. His face scrunched up as soon as he found out where he was. He didn't know how long it had been, but he was lying naked in a tub. Different varieties of medicinal herbs were floating on the water. What was more, it seemed like they were out of the ordinary, as there were even some herbs Muyang had never seen before. You've opened your eyes. Just stay still. This is the only way to provide warmth to your newly born body. Blip blop. Late in the evening, Ogre sat next to the tub as he put in small amounts of green powder into the water. You should know you're blessed. I don't even take care of mighty warriors like this. Do you know how rare this unicorn horn powder is? You're using it to warm my body up? Muyang couldn't help but be a bit surprised. Unicorn horns were first-class materials. It was a treasure that permanently increased the grade of whatever it was used on by a level or higher. Ogre had made it into a powder and was pouring it into the tub. He spoke as if it was nothing. You just need to know that. We fire tars definitely pay back our debts. The chieftain has allowed me to use this powder, so you shouldn't experience any side effects. Side effects. We forcefully balanced your body. The body is an amazing thing, as it always tries to go back to its previous form no matter how bad it was. Normally, to maintain the balance that's been set in place, you need to live at least half of a year in distress. I guess you're saying I'm fine now. The unicorn horn powder produced the highest healing ability, as it has the power to correct the dislocation. Ogre explained in a very calm tone. Muyang ruminated his words for a moment before he lifted his hand up. He nodded as he looked around his body. It feels light. His whole body felt lighter. It was the first time he experienced this kind of feeling. He thought he could understand what it meant for someone to be born again. My whole body is completely changed. This is incomparable to the past. Muyang became more surprised as he checked his own body. It was as if a rock had turned into a sponge. Of course, he had to move to be sure, but he expected his growth potential to be completely different. He instinctively felt this way. That he could become stronger faster. He could reach higher peaks. It said the first stage of metamorphosis was complete. It wasn't like he didn't experience something like this in the past. However, the timing was very early and the content was completely different. Traditionally, it was told that you needed to finish 5th stage of metamorphosis to become a transcendent being. In the past, Muyang had finished 4 stages of metamorphosis. However, the transformation that he finished didn't seem like a normal metamorphosis. Magic resistance has increased by 30. There is a strong feeling that I have changed from before. In a normal transformation, the stats didn't increase. Only the growth potential increased. However, magic resistance had increased by 30. His mind felt much clearer as well. But which part of you is true? A voice cleared his thoughts. Before he noticed, Ogre was looking straight at Muyang's face. Perhaps. Muyang lowered his head and looked at his own reflection. However, nothing really changed in his appearance. His white hair and goblin horn were still there. What's your meaning in asking? If you're trying to hide it, I won't ask any further. You really are a rare breed. Even the fact that you neutralized a far greater dose of poison than you could handle. Ogre looked at Muyang as if he was looking at a rare animal in a zoo. Muyang moved the poison using spirits, but Ogre didn't seem like he noticed it. Unlike the other fire tars, I am quite lenient. But if you're going to hide it, you must do it well. Because you cannot guarantee that others are going to be as lenient as me. Ogre got up as he stretched his back after he told Muyang a riddling advice. In the morning you will naturally be able to get up. This location is close to where we moved our tribe, so there shouldn't be any monsters attacking. Gibberish. However, Muyang's expression hardened. He wasn't certain, but he had a notion of what Ogre was talking about. There's a possibility that he found out that I am a human. He couldn't say that there was no possibility at all. Muyang's appearance might have been revealed during the process of metamorphosis. Ogre smiled as he turned around. As Muyang saw him, he spoke. Are you leaving? I have done everything I need. Also. As if he suddenly thought of something, Ogre turned his head and spoke. I have recently heard from goblins that a group of humans was roaming around here. It doesn't seem bad for you to look into it. He tossed Muyang information as if he was being generous. He figured out. By now Muyang was certain that Ogre knew Muyang was a human. It seemed like he was telling him to return to the group of humans, as this was a demon god's territory where humans weren't allowed to enter. But Muyang could see how generous Ogre was being by letting him go. It was the most kindness Ogre could offer Muyang. It wouldn't have been weird if a fire tar became furious for tricking him. Muyang could only acknowledge that this monster was better than humans in certain ways. Let's meet again. Wah. It might be better to not see each other again. But if we ever do meet again, that time make sure you know what you are. Ogre left after he laughed refreshingly. For a while Muyang looked at his reflection in the water. He regained his vitality as morning arrived. Muyang got out of the tub and changed his clothes. Afterwards he thought over what Ogre had said to him yesterday. Humans are in the demon god's territory. Are they wanderers? There were occasionally people who walked the path of a wanderer after they escaped the great city. People who could no longer stand the cruelty of humans, or some who had to live in hiding because they committed a sin. It was most likely they were the latter, but Muyang was still curious about the wanderers in the demon god's territory. Even the people who run away don't run away to a demon god's territory, unless they committed a capital offense. It could be a guild who entered to gain something from here. He quietly rubbed his chin. Muyang even considered the fact that they might have information that Muyang wasn't aware of. Or they were after the same thing as Muyang. Whatever the reason was, Muyang was interested. However, he didn't know their specific location. The goblins did testify, but they could be lying, or the humans might have left already. If they are nearby, I will meet them one day. First he needed to hunt. He thought of a few places he had seen when he was wandering around with Ogre. There was a perfect hunting place for Muyang. Muyang slowly walked, sweeping the ground. Fossa. A predator of the rugged wilderness. It was a cat-like monster with such a high agility that it was very difficult to detect with your eyes. However, if you could just detect it, it wasn't a hard opponent to fight against. Muyang's eyes were easily able to locate them. With his incredible eyesight and his ability to predict its movements, Muyang was able to easily capture a fossa. Girl. Kaiwa. However, the fossa was with 4 others. Poison shade. 33 shadows popped out of Muyang's body. Shadows would attach onto the bodies of the fossi and release a poison. The fossi started to die as their bodies were turning into green lights. The fossi noticed the change in their bodies, attacked more violently. It was because they realized that if they didn't kill Muyang that they would die. However, Muyang's eyes, which looked at the charging fossi, were the same as a hunter. Swoosh. He unsheathed anguish. Slash. The massacre had started. Muyang wiped his brows and drank water. Some are still following me. It was already 15th day since he parted with Ogre. He continued to have bloody battles in the demon god's territory. During the process he faced a pack of fossi, and they have been chasing him for the past 3 days. Although he killed more than 20 of them, he still had more than 100 left. Muyang was slipping past their tight blockade as he reduced their numbers. The fossi would probably be incredibly pissed right now. My stats are continuously improving as I hunt. Muyang looked at his status viewer as he rested his tiresome body. Within just 15 days his stats rose steeply. It was an amount that would have taken him at least 1 or 2 months. If he continued on like this, it seemed like he would be able to accomplish his goals in achieving a 100 on all his basic stats. Problem was, I need to get rid of the fossi that are following me. Fossi were very fast. They specialized in group hunts. They were even good at quickly running away. Even though Muyang was alert even while he slept, he wasn't used to being publicly chased like this. It took him about an hour to kill 4 fossi. He was able to win as he created lots of wounds and used the poison shades to spread poison through their wounds. Mu-young would have been out of options if he loosened his guard and was surrounded by over 100 Fosse. He tried erasing his markings, but the Fosse were able to find Mu-young's location like a ghost. I kill them or get killed by them. It was a chase that would have only ended when one of the two was satisfied. It was fortunate that he wasn't giving them any openings. The Fosse wouldn't be able to carelessly attack him as they also had their guard up against him. If this delicate barrier was to break, a full-scale bloody battle would begin. He helped me. The guard that he had continuously placed on for the last 3 days was broken due to the intrusion of a person. An almost naked woman was being chased by about 10 very excited Fosse. The woman only had a piece of cloth over her body. She seemed young but was very lean and had scars all over her body. The Fosse lost their guard. I have no choice but to fight. The barrier between the pack of Fosse and Mu-young was being maintained very risky. The Fosse didn't easily attack him because they knew how great Mu-young's skills were. If they attacked him with their lives, the fight would have been over already. Fosse were monsters that were that cautious. However, they were excited when the woman barged in. To the point they were willing to just enter the area Mu-young was in. If this was true, then he couldn't just send them away. If those 10 Fosse lived, instantly more than 100 Fosse would approach. It would be your end if you ever took a monster in this world lightly. It would have been reckless for Mu-young to handle 10 Fosse alone. Mu-young could only summon his undead. For now it was the best way. The blazing spear soldier, the sorceress of lightning and the black sun warrior were summoned. It might not be a good thing to summon a lot of undead to deal with the Fosse. Kill the wild cats. Mu-young made a simple command. And together they went to fight them. A woman who was approaching him on the other side widened her eyes in shock. She thought he was a human but found that he had a horn was on his forehead. Ah! Like a marionette with its strings cut off, she fell to her knees as she found out he was also a monster. How stupid of her to ask a monster for help. Her last bit of hope disappeared as monsters approached from both sides. The woman closed her eyes. Kaya, plang, flesh. Huge explosive sounds erupted around her. However, her body was fine. She felt weird, so she opened her eyes only to see the Fosse and the goblin fight each other. I will get eaten after the fight. It was a splendor even those who were vigilant couldn't follow. But it was certain that the goblin was winning against the Fosse. She thought of running away while they were busy but soon realized it was useless. She was destined to die as she entered the territory of the Fosse and the goblin. She just blankly watched the fight with a resigned look on her face. He isn't a normal goblin. He was much stronger than most goblins. The woman's expression became gloomier. The fight ended after 30 minutes. It resulted in the goblin's victory. The goblin, who was scratched by the claws of the Fosse, approached the woman and spoke with impatience. Who are you? The woman tightly bit her lips. Goblins like to tease their prey. They would never simply kill their prey. Instead, it might be better to bite her tongue and die now. But she didn't have the courage. Peel, please don't come closer. Those words were all she could mutter. The scrawny woman took out a marble from her bosom. The marble was cut in half. It was emitting a purple light and a hidden power could be felt. Mu-young, who saw that half, opened his eyes as if it was unexpected. Marble of territory? He finally seemed to understand how she came all the way here after going past the pack of Fosse. Honestly, he was half doubtful. The Fosse were currently surrounding from afar and were slowly closing their distance. But unless someone was quite strong, it was impossible for someone to slip through their blockade and approach Mu-young. So he thought it was fishing that wanderers would do, but the story changed if she possessed the marble of territory. It's a tool only pioneers use. The marble of territory was an essential item that would be used to create a village or set up a city. Those that were known as pioneers would use this item when setting up an area inside an unexplored territory. It prevented low-ranked monsters from approaching and created a land that humans could live on. The foundation for erecting all cities began by using this marble. Because she had an item like that, he understood why the Fosse didn't easily approach her. Mu-young stretched his hand. And he grabbed the marble of territory. How could a goblin? The woman was shocked. It wasn't possible for a monster to personally touch the marble of territory. It might have been possible if the monster was a high rank or a top rank, but wasn't he a goblin? Of course, Muyang wasn't a goblin. So there was nothing wrong with grabbing the marble of territory, but for the lady who didn't know that, she couldn't help but misunderstand. Is there a village near here? Village. There is something similar. She gulped down her saliva and replied. It meant there was a gathering of people. Muyang grinned before saying, So you successfully entered the demon god's territory. Who are you? Are you really a goblin? The woman asked as if she was grasping at straws. Although the goblin in front of her looked vicious, she didn't feel any hostility from him. And there was nothing she could do besides believe. Muyang briefly looked at the woman's eyes. The woman's body curled up. He slowly stretched his hand and touched the naked woman's body. Her body would flinch at his touch, but she was already as weak as she could be, so she was unable to resist. Traces of abuse. However, Muyang didn't care about the woman's feelings. And he was quite a distance away from feeling sexual desire. Only he was slightly interested in the wounds on her body. So you escaped from your village? He said with certainty. These injuries could only be created from abuse. Although he didn't know who that person was, he knew that whoever he was very vicious. So she eventually couldn't take it any longer and escaped and stole the marble of territory along with her. As if he had hit the mark, the woman sat down hugging her knees. Where is the village? Over there. She pointed her finger eastwards. It was the direction Muyang was moving towards while avoiding the pack of Fosse. I have to change my direction. It was actually better. If he didn't meet the woman, things would have gotten more difficult. He was already in a situation where he was having difficulties just dealing with the Fosse. He wanted to worry about other problems after getting rid of the tenacious Fosse. Kaya! The Fosse cried from afar. They had discovered the deaths of their companions. Muyang thought over the woman's circumstances before coming to a conclusion. There's a lot I want to ask. First, he would take her with him. Get on. When he showed her his back, the woman only looked at him with a stiff body. I won't stop you if you want to die. No. My body is stiff. 1 second. The woman quickly became serious and threw her body over his back. Art of death. Muyang reanimated the dead Fosse. Because he was in a rush, the scores were low, but it was enough if they could just gain a bit of time. Block them. A single command. The Fosse that have turned undead stood in a line. Muyang started to move his feet quickly. He moved for half a day. Only then could he escape from the Fosse's blockade. Still, it was for at most 4 hours. They would be followed afterwards, but it was important that he gain some time to rest. After the fire tars moved their village, the territories of other monsters became a mess. Muyang sat near a well and clicked his tongue. The reason why the Fosse could be this active was because the fire tars had moved their village. As a mess was created by monsters invading other territories while avoiding the fire tars, the area of activity of the Fosse increased. Fosse are monsters that have an incredible thirst for revenge. They won't let me go. Muyang started to hunt after Ogre left. And he was briefly fascinated by his quick growth. His mistake was killing the Fosse cubs he came across coincidentally. Afterwards he was hunted by the Fosse. This continued for over 3 days. I can't keep going south. I have to reduce their numbers somehow. He didn't have detailed information about this area. It was suicidal to go down recklessly. Muyang tapped his knees with his fingers. Then he grabbed a branch and drew a line on the ground. The Fosse's blockade, he drew the path and the location of the approaching pack. What are you drawing? Muyang slightly lifted his head. The naked woman approached after washing herself in the water. A bold appearance unlike her first impression. It meant she was certain that Muyang wouldn't kill her. Away. Ah, so, we are being chased by the Fosse? That's right. There wasn't really a reason to hide it. The woman gently smiled. Then let's combine our strength. I am also being chased. He already expected that. The hunting party would have probably been formed by now. However, Muyang was cold. You have to be helpful for us to even combine our strengths. I know the paths in this area. So help me leave the demon god's territory. And we will naturally be able to get rid of the Fosse as well. Impossible. It didn't matter if she knew the paths, it was impossible to leave the demon god's territory. It would be difficult unless they had multiple lives. As if she anticipated Mu Young's reply, she gave him the next best plan. Then ensure my safety. We can't survive on our own anyways. A change in attitude. She was completely different from when she was filled with fear. She tried to reveal her worth as she attempted to negotiate. We can't survive on our own, huh? Mu Young was secretly speechless. He had experienced situations that were multiple times more severe than this. The current actions of the woman were like holding a candle to the sun. After carrying her and keeping her alive, it seemed that she believed that it would continue. She simply regarded herself too highly. Mu Young got up from his place. Then he slowly approached the woman and grabbed her neck and lifted her up. I think you're mistaken. We are not equals. The woman would die without Mu Young, but Mu Young wouldn't die without her. So how could they be equal? Plunge. As he strengthened his grip, the woman's face became pale. Cough, cough. You need to cough up everything you know, so your life can extend by even a second. The woman must have thought that Mu Young wouldn't kill her, but she must have realized by now that that was a delusion. Although it would become a bit more difficult, it was a situation that he could definitely handle by himself. It was good to be bold, but that was still something they had to show depending on the situation. If you understand, nod your head. Please. But as soon as he loosened his grip, the woman collapsed on the ground and breathed heavily. Mu Young unconcernedly asked her questions. You definitely said there was a village. How many people are there? Who are in charge and how is the village run? Cough. 100. The one known as Heidegger kidnapped people and created a territory. He treats everyone like slaves. Her strong will disappeared. She had become a rabbit stricken with fear. She had understood her position. Mu Young meditated on her reply. 100 people. It was more than he expected. What was more, Mu Young knew the name that came out of the woman's mouth. The outlaw Heidegger? That's right. How did you know? The woman was frightened. Her expression asked how a goblin could possibly know that name. Mu Young frowned. The outlaw Heidegger. He never imagined he would hear his name here. He was definitely evil and was not bound to human standards. Because of his cruel and wicked personality, there was even a time when he was chased by all the guilds and clans. The word great villain really suited him. Anyways, how was he currently within the demon god's territory? I never heard that they found any signs of humans here. That meant Heidegger's new plan failed. Or he moved after succeeding. However, he couldn't understand just why he would set up an area in a place crawling with monsters. Heidegger became notorious after the Great Calamity started. There wasn't much information about him before then. But Heidegger liked to complete weird trials. There was a high chance that his actions had something to do with a trial. There's something here. He's not the type of bastard who moves without certainty. A trial that required him to kidnap more than 100 people and even enter a demon god's territory. His mouth watered. There were many things still unknown about Heidegger after becoming notorious. As he had suddenly appeared and disappeared. There were rumors that he was killed by a demon god or died in a trial, but that was it. They were all only rumors. However, Heidegger was a figure that was chased down by all the large groups. He had that much power. And the origin of his power could be from this place. Mu Young organized his thoughts and said, "Do you know what Heidegger is trying to do? There are words that it has something to do with ancient relics. Besides that, I don't know." Even if she said relics, there were many types. Anyways, it was definitely something to covet. This time he changed his question. How many hunters do you think will chase you? Hunt, farce. I'm talking about Heidegger's companions that are going to chase you. She thought for a moment before opening her mouth. 13. If they don't have the marble of territory, they aren't able to declare their territory. Everyone should be coming after me. She was definitely more obedient. Although she was still somewhat stricken with fear, it was better than taking the lead and getting dragged down. 13 people and Heidegger. It's enough. Mu Young nodded his head. We need to lure them in and make them fight with the Fosse. Sorry? That's dangerous. I did not ask you for your opinion. It was an announcement. And this was the optimal method to survival. The woman who only thought to run trembled her body. It was easy to say that he would lure them in and make them fight, but it was like walking a dangerous tightrope. However, Mu-young was stubborn. If you want to live, draw a line. The best location for them to fight each other. He handed her the branch. The outlaw Heidegger. He was a highly notorious villain among villains. But Mu-young was the same as him in terms of viciousness. They would know who the real outlaw was once they fought. Mu-young took out anguish and a talisman. Ogre's strength. It was one of the rewards he received from stopping the 18th wave in the endless battlefield. He placed it aside as he didn't need it at the time, but going forwards, it would be an all-out war. The pack of Fosse and the outlaw Heidegger were both opponents he couldn't take lightly. He now had no choice but to use the talisman for an immediate increase in military force. I need to be careful when I strengthen an equipment. Not everything was good when strengthened. Strengthening via a talisman could lead to a loss if he didn't use it properly. There was definitely a possibility that a bad characteristic could be upgraded or the durability could be decreased. Mu-young carefully looked at his talisman. Soon information about it popped. Name: Ogre's Strength. Rank A. Classification: Single use. Effect: a talisman with Ogre's Strength. Asterisk equipment strengthening. Asterisk strength 5-10 increase. Asterisk a characteristic of an ogre is randomly revealed. There was a chance it would receive a random characteristic. There was also another problem. Which equipment to use it on? There were equipment that had better compatibility with a strengthening talisman. And there was a good chance the equipment would influence the characteristic. Anguish. And Mu-young chose anguish. He thought the only equipment optimal for the ogre's strength talisman was anguish, even though a lot of the durability was used up and it was unrepairable. From the start, anguish was the only one that increased his strength. It showed how much it leaned towards strength. It was the same thing with the ogre's strength talisman. Also, no other equipment was more destructive than a weapon. Mu-young placed the ogre's strength talisman on anguish. As he battered the talisman against anguish, it was absorbed into anguish. Anguish was lifted from his hand. The color of anguish slowly changed. Now you could say it became a shade darker. It was to the point where he didn't believe it could get any darker. Mu-young clenched his fists. There was no way for him to be always right. Although it did say the compatibility was great, it might have strengthened something unexpected. With a slight tension, shortly after the transformation of anguish was complete. A short message. He immediately grabbed anguish that was dropping to the ground. Name: Anguish. Rank A+. Classification: A. Keepable type. Durability: 16-344 unrepairable. Effect: Star of David, a sword given to a person who had completed the trial of Gremory. Asterisk strength +5. Asterisk ability to steal blood from the opponent and recover the stamina of the user. Asterisk strength +9. Asterisk ogre's cruelty. As you kill more enemies, the strength increases slightly. Active for 30 minutes. Clench. He clenched his fists. The results were better than what he imagined. Strength +9. It was at most 10, but there barely was a time 10 was achieved. It wasn't just a problem of chance. If you strengthen it 100 times, maybe it will result in a single maximum increase. You could say it was an amazing result to get 9, and above all, its rank increased. Although only a plus sign was added, this showed the class of the equipment. It was divided into 3 different types. Plus meant rare, plus meant unique, and plus meant epic. Even if only one was added, it was an excellent improvement. What was more, these kinds of improvements were almost non-existent A rank and above. Even the characteristic wasn't bad. Like the word states, it's very ogre-like. The more he killed, the better. He understood why it was very compatible with anguish. As anguish had the basic ability to steal blood from its victim to recover the stamina of its user. Both improved each other's effectiveness. Mu-young held anguish. It felt much smoother in the hand than before. Let's begin. He walked slowly. His footsteps felt a little lighter than before. He entered the Fosse's blockade. Some could ask if he was going in to die, but Mu-young had a plan of his own. Black Sun Warrior, go to the other side and find the people who move in a group. Attack them and lure them to the designated location. The Death Warrior in full armor started to move right away. If it was the Black Sun Warrior, he wouldn't be damaged by most attacks. As he was not only strong but also swift, there was no better bait than him. Face-to-face combat was forbidden as Muyang didn't know how strong the current Heidegger was. Muyang turned his head after the Black Sun Warrior left. He took out a talisman. The Spirit of the Fossa. Like how he enchanted talismans from killing the shrew mice, the same thing was possible with the Fossi. However, it was rare for the talismans to appear, unlike the time with the shrew mice. They were monsters on a different level. Hundreds of shrew mice wouldn't be able to do anything against a Fossa. This was the one talisman he was able to get until now. It's impossible to trick all the Fossi with this one talisman, but I should be able to do it. Muyang had already experienced becoming part of the ground, the wind, and a weak living creature. Imitating them should be simple if he could just detect them and use the Spirit of the Fossa. Rip. Muyang ripped the talisman. At the same time, his senses were enhanced as they became more alert. He erased his scent by rubbing the blood of a dead Fossa over his body and matched his heartbeat to that of a Fossa after recalling their movements. He closed his eyes and slowly remembered each detail. He needed to believe that he wasn't a human to trick the Fossi. Hey, Kawa. The Fossi that formed the blockade ran towards him. The few Fossi that came very close to him smelled him with their noses. They raised their ears to listen, then played around as they tapped him. However, Muyang didn't move. In time, the Fossi could only be confused. There was definitely a prey here, but it disappeared into thin air. They recognized Muyang as part of their pack. I can't maintain this for long. Muyang placed his hands on the floor. He moved on all fours and hung around with the Fossi for a while. However, the duration wasn't long. At most an hour. He didn't really use it until now, as it was impossible to completely lose the Fossi within that time. An hour. He needed to accomplish what he wanted within that time. Muyang quickly scanned the pack. There they are. His eyes flashed as soon as he saw the Fossa cubs. Heidegger. A bushy beard and a wide-brimmed hat. His figure as he walked on the wasteland resembled a typical outlaw from the West. About a dozen subordinates were following behind him. Chief, didn't we come in too deep? A nearby subordinate asked. However, Heidegger grated his teeth and scrunched up his face. I don't know why, but the territories of the monsters have been rearranged. It's fine right now. Brother. Alex. Where did you say that B*teeth was? A man named Alex answered while he held half of the marble of territory. If we go this way, it's the direction of the crater. Crater? Is she trying to fall down and kill herself? Isn't it possible that she is trying to get rid of the marble by going there? Fup. Heidegger slapped his forehead. Unless that B*teeth is crazy. When he went out for a bit, a crazy woman took half of the marble and ran. It happened as one of his subordinates fell asleep while guarding the marble. He killed that subordinate out of anger, but he didn't regret it. It became troublesome to find the marble of territory. Either way, he was nervous. His rule was perfect. He allowed them to fully experience the terror of a superhuman with military strength. Unless they were crazy, how could they possibly decide to run away? He kidnapped 100 weaklings from a city and took them to a demon god's territory. He killed all those who resisted along the way. As no one would really care about the deaths of a few weaklings. That was how Heidegger built his own castle. The surviving slaves faithfully carried out his orders. I was almost there. Heidegger clenched his fist tightly. Soon he could have proclaimed this territory as his. He needed a special symbol that suited him if he wanted to proclaim a territory as his with the marble of territory. In other words, like the Sky Library in the Great City, he needed something that would be the center of his city. As there was no way something like that would exist in a demon god's territory, he had to make one himself. And it was almost complete. He never thought a crazy woman would appear and take it away when he was about to complete it. If you lost the marble, I won't let you die easily. I will make you regret being alive. Heidegger grated his teeth. How much time had passed since they started to walk? Stomp. Heidegger stopped. Behind him, the rest of his subordinates became quiet. Something's approaching. Is it a monster? It's not a living creature. This feeling, it's an undead. Heidegger was certain. He could feel the strong aura of death. In this situation it could only be an undead. What? An undead? Did a lich appear from somewhere? Everyone was making a fuss. Liches were monsters that were as strong as the fire tars but harder to fight against. The ones they deemed as an enemy were annihilated using few thousands of undead. A story about a lich being an equal match against a decent-sized army didn't exist for no reason. If they got caught, of course they wouldn't survive. Even if Heidegger was there it would have been the same. Not a lich. Much weaker than a lich. However, Heidegger shook his head. He was able to instinctively classify things that were stronger or weaker than him. That was how he was able to survive for such a long time while committing all sorts of crimes. And from what he could sense, the undead was strong for an undead but still weaker than him. However, he needed to be careful. He felt this was fishy from some odd reason. If it passed by, maybe, but it was approaching them as if it was aiming for Heidegger from the start. Raise your weapons. It's coming this way. From afar an undead wearing black armor appeared. A death warrior? The undead charged at Heidegger the moment he came to sight. He had black wings on his back and was holding a black sword. He had never seen a death warrior that looked like that. However, they would inevitably clash. Heidegger held a sword in both hands. Muyang lured and kidnapped a fossa cub, and changed his direction towards the crater. You came. The woman shivered as she held the marble of territory as she waited on the top of the crater. It wasn't that big of a crater, but it was still active with lava boiling inside. Above it were monsters the size of humans flying around. Pyroxes aren't combative monsters. You don't need to be afraid. Still, the woman looked towards the crater. Lizards with wings of a bat. These were pyroxes. One of the few peaceful monsters. There wasn't a lot of information about them as they were quite mystic creatures that lived inside craters. From the start there weren't many either since they were rare. However, as the woman didn't know this, she could only wait for Muyang as if her life was on the edge. But what is that cloth? The woman asked as her gaze turned towards it. Muyang was holding something wrapped with a cloth. As if it wasn't anything unusual, he casually replied. It's Foss's cub. What would you do if Fossy came because of it? The woman was terrified. The Fossy cherished their cubs. The whole pack will attack if you touched one of them. I brought it because of that reason. Muyang also knew that very well. Wasn't he unintentionally engaged in a chase because of it? However, this time he was planning to use the Fossy's revengefulness. They are coming. He was able to sense the Black Sun warrior approaching. Although it was quite a large distance away, it was like something similar to the authority of the Death Lord. Muyang opened up the cloth. A newborn cub the size of his wrist cried out loud. Muyang took out Anguish. Wait. As the woman screamed, Anguish quickly moved.